what today's lesson will be about. Today's lesson is going to be about emotions. Now, we all start with a primary set, and as we grow older, we acquire more of them.
When your emotions control your action, it affects not only yourself, but the people around you.
This will help. Sit down. Emotions are centered in the lower part of the brain.
It is complicated, yes, but mysterious no longer.
Emotional behavior is largely involuntary.
I can't believe that.
We have certain basic emotions which are controlled subconsciously. Notice your own emotional reactions. What did you feel? What did you do?
Under control, your emotions can make you healthier and happier and improve the lives of people around you.
This is pretty clever.
That's a rather simplified suggestion of a complex mental process, but you get the idea.
Last week, we started a brand new series. We're talking about emotions. How can we get a grip on our hearts and our minds? If you weren't here last week, raise your hand. I'm going to catch you up real quick. We talked about fear, all right? And we talked about how fear sometimes can be a great thing and sometimes it can be crippling and it can cause us to just feel like we can't move through life. Now, here's what I'm going to ask of you guys. Hear a lot of talking. I need y'all to listen, all right? That would really help me out. I need y'all to not be middle school. I need y'all to be high school, okay? Also, I still need like 5 people to volunteer to help me this Sunday. It's going to be a really cool opportunity to serve your church. You don't have to do anything embarrassing. Literally, you're walking from Sanders Hall into the church. So if you're interested in helping out with that, let me know, all right? So tonight, we are talking about sadness, all right? Sadness is a normal part of life. Sadness is good. I think sadness ultimately keeps our emotions in check. Sadness is a healthy emotion to have, and oftentimes sadness can be confused with depression. Tonight we're going to talk about both of those things. Have y'all ever met somebody who is always happy and they're never sad though? Have you ever met somebody like that? Yes. There's a girl that I know. She used to be in our youth group. She's not. She's an adult and is married now. But she was always happy all the time. Like literally she could give you the worst news ever and she would just do it with a smile on her face. She's like, hey, you only have 4 months to live, but God is good. Like she's like that person, right? She's so sweet. Katie, what's her name? Sarah. Sarah is a girl that, I told her to say that, but she agrees with me. I don't want to say her full name because some of you know her. Your mother works with her mother. You know her. You agree. Sarah is the happiest person on earth. Okay, Sarah Bullington is her name. She is full of joy. She is full of love. And she just is so happy. If you know her or you know her brother, they're great people. I love them. But I was always like, Sarah, like, are you ever just not happy? And she's like, sometimes. I was like, but like when? And she's like, I don't know. And she just was always so happy. And I was like, this has got to be fake. And she's just genuinely a happy person. And then there's some of you on the other side that have never been happy. And you're just always sad. And you're just always, bleh, right? And you just walk around like, I don't know what. And I'm like, hey, smile. And you're like, I don't want to. I don't know how to. All these emotions, right? And sometimes when we think about the emotions of happiness and sadness, sadness always gets the rap as being the negative one. It doesn't always have to be like that, but as we think about depression, like the idea and the difference of sadness and depression is that sadness is a natural part of life that is usually connected with certain experiences. Pain or loss or even a meaningful moment of connection or joy that makes us value our lives, right? And so as we think about that, we're going to talk about both emotions, sadness and depression. And again, hear me, when we talk about emotions, I'm not here to fix you. I'm not here to say that you were broken or you were wrong or you were this or you were perfect or you're whatever. I'm just telling you about the emotions that we deal with and then how we can handle them in our lives, all right? So last week, as I mentioned, in our family, we love the movie Inside Out. I don't know that I'm ready to watch Inside Out 2 with Riley the teenager. That's going to stress me out. All right, and I think my daughter will just try and embody that, and I don't know that I want that. But in the movie Inside Out, how many of you guys have seen this? They talk about all these emotions. Sadness is one of the characters. You know, Phyllis plays her from The Office, and she just is kind of walking around like the whole time. And in the movie, sadness at first seems to be what messes everything up. But as the movie goes on, what happens is that the other characters realize that without sadness, the greatest moments in life would have never happened. You know, people say sometimes that you can't enjoy a sunny day until you've experienced a rainy day. I think that's true with our emotions too. Until you experience sadness, you don't realize joy and happiness and the importance that they play in your lives. And so tonight, we're going to look at Psalm 77. Psalm 77 was written by a man named Asaph. Now, Asaph was dealing with some feelings, and just a little bit of background here. He was one of David's 3 chief musicians. So picture like a John Skelly, right? And he's just trying to help out the king. And if the king is sad, man, I'm going to sing you a song. But as a human being, Asaph also has these emotions. And so the psalm is a psalm of lament, that it is from a community of people that are crying out to God. And they're asking him to not be silent in their time of need. And the question is, will God let his created people be destroyed, is ultimately asked. And it comes full circle at the end of this chapter. And so the wonder of God as creator is reflecting on his care for Moses and Aaron. And so I'm going to be in Psalm 77. I would love for you guys to follow along with me, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump around a little bit in this chapter. I'm going to read it all, but I'm going to read it a little bit out of order because it flows with my sermon. So we're going to start verse 1. That's a good place to start. But this is what Asaph says. He says, I cry aloud to God. Aloud to God. Then he says, and he will hear me. So this mood here is I'm going to cry aloud to God. He's going to hear me. And in the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. He says, my soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. You're like, God, who hurt you, right? And in verse 7, he says this, will the Lord spurn forever? Listen to how he's describing what God is going to do. Will the Lord forever spurn and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? He says, has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? There's 4 things that I want you guys to focus on tonight when it comes to dealing with sadness. The first thing that we have to do when we experience sadness is we have to cry out to God. Again, I think sadness is a normal emotion, and I'm not telling you to run from sadness, but if you allow sadness to continue to dwell in your life, it can slowly start to become something that looks like depression. It's something where it's not just like, hey, I can change that and I can get over that. Like sadness is like when you go to a restaurant and they mess up your order and you don't realize it until you get home. Maybe anger. I know they're really close in there, right? But like depression is like I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't do anything because of the emotions and the feelings that I have. Many times what we try to do is we try to fix sadness on our own. How many of you guys have ever done this? Hey, I'm sad, let me do something that makes me happy. Some of you are like, I don't know why I ate 7 hamburgers that day. I just was feeling sad and I ate my feelings. We try to do it when other people are sad, right? What do you tell people that are sad? What do you say? Cheer up, be fine. Cheer up. We say that, we're like, hey, cheer up. It's okay, we want you to be happy. It's like, it's not okay. Listen, we walk around like it's not okay for people to be sad. It is okay, but we're like, hey, you're kind of ruining the mood here. Like we were all smiling and then you came in and now we feel like we got to be different. So we're like, hey, just cheer up. It's fine. The only problem is, like we see with Asaph, his soul is refusing to be comforted, right? He says, I moan, when I meditate, my spirit faints. My soul refuses to be comforted. In verse 3, he says he meditates on the situation and trying to think his way through his problems, his spirit becomes weak. He cannot remove himself from the feelings. He stretched out his hand like a drowning man. He's just like, could somebody just help me? Could somebody, God, could you just help me? I am stretching out my hands to you like someone longing to be saved. Imagine this image, so helpless, needing to be saved, trying to figure out how to fix his problems, and he does not know what to do. Perhaps some of you can identify with a feeling that Asaph has. You're like, yeah, that feels like me. Like, I can't just get out of the funk that I'm in. I can't just move beyond. Maybe it's a relationship thing. Maybe somebody broke your heart. Maybe somebody cheated on you. Maybe somebody said something ugly about you behind your back. I don't know where you're at, but there's times where we get so weighed down that we just feel like someone who's just drowning in emotions. Don't miss what his first response was, though. In the battle with this depression, he doesn't pretend that he's got his act all together. He doesn't act like he's got it all figured out or turn to something that will soothe his pain. Instead, verse 1, it says this. He says, I cry aloud to God. When you guys are experiencing sadness or depression, or you are just down, how often do you just cry out to God? And I don't know what to do next. And so instead of just trying to fix my problems, what if you just cried out to God? What if you just gave it to him? And see, he cycles through this wide and uncontrollable range of emotions, but he didn't try and hide them from God. And this is how he made sure that sadness did not turn into this deep depression. He was talking about it. Listen, guys in the room, I tell you something. When God created you as a man, he created you with the inability to communicate. Now, some of you can do it, but most of you cannot. And what we tend to do, and I'm talking to myself, and I'm not even going to make eye contact with Katie, is that I just kind of bury stuff, right? How many barriers do I have in the room? Hey, let's not talk about feelings. Let's just bury feelings, right? Come on, right? Now, some of you are like, that's not me. I want to talk about all of that. Oh, you're a precious, beautiful unicorn, and you are so rare, and we need to keep you alive. But most guys, we just bury stuff. We're like, it's fine. I don't want to seem weak. I don't want to seem like I don't have it all together, so I just won't talk about it. Now, girls, on the other hand, they're like, let's talk about it. And you're like, we don't have to. Maybe in a year or 7. We don't have to talk about it. And so that's how another way that God has created us differently. But he asks God the hard questions that depression raises. And when we do the same thing, it can completely change how sadness affects our life. Look at what it says in Psalm chapter 34, verse 18. Some of y'all need to write it on your arm. Some of y'all need to get a Post-it note, put it in the mirror in your bathroom. It says this in verse 34, verse 18. It says that the Lord is near to the brokenhearted. The Lord is near to those who are brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Students, understand, when you are brokenhearted, when you are down, when you feel like nothing is going your way, God is near to you. Here's the next thing that you have to do. Number 2 is this. You have to redirect your thoughts. Do you know what that means? Like, redirect your thoughts. You do it most days. You're in history class. You're in world history, and you're just bored out of your mind. And then the bell rings and boom, right? I redirect my thoughts. I'm back to my friends. Or maybe you were already talking to your friends. Some of you, you redirect your thoughts so quick, so fast. Some of you go from school to work. You go to a job and now, oh man, I'm here. I'm at Chick-fil-A. I'm at the whatever place I work at. Now I am here. I have redirected my thoughts. Some of you come into church and then you redirect your thoughts. You're like, no, I'm not going to think about God. I'm going to think about something else. Like, what can I think about? Oh, fantasy football. I better set my lineups. Even though it's Wednesday and that doesn't even start till tomorrow, I better get on top of that. And if any of you pull your phones out right now, I'm going to jump in off stage and take them. All right? We redirect our thoughts all the time. Look at what it says in Psalm chapter 77. So I'm going to pick up in verse 4. He says this, you hold my eyelids open. Yo, that's different. And he says, I am so troubled that I cannot speak. Have you ever been just so maybe frustrated, irritated, whatever, that you just can't even formulate words? You know what I'm talking about? You just can't even, you're like, and they're like, what? And you're like, yes. That's what I meant to say. You get so irritated or you get so sad or you just can't even. He says, I am so troubled that I cannot speak. He says this in verse 5, I consider the days of old, the years long ago. And I said, let me remember my song in the night. Remember, he was one of the chief musicians to the king. And so he says, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Now, what I need you guys to understand is that when his spirit has made this diligent search, that's when he begins listing off all the things, right? He says, will the Lord spurn forever? Will he not be favorable again? He says, his steadfast love forever ceased. He says all those things. And I gave you kind of the bad because look at what he says here in verse 10. He says this, then I said, I will appeal to this. to the years of the right hand of the Most High. He's kind of coming back and he's saying, I'm not going to focus on have you ceased to love me. I'm not going to focus on are you forever gone. But instead, in verse 10, he says that. He says, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder all your work and I will meditate on your mighty deeds. You ever been sad about something? Raise your hand if you've been sad about something. Some of y'all had to share why you were sad in small groups. You're like, I'm really kind of sick of the emotion thing because last week I told y'all what I was afraid of. Now I told y'all what I'm sad about. I'm sorry. We're going to deal with disgust. We're going to deal with anger. We're going to deal with joy. So just be prepared, right? Typically, when you feel this way of having sadness, you tend to focus on it, right? We obsess about it. Whatever it is that makes you sad, you are just all in. And then we kind of just like, I can't get out of it, right? I'm always sad about the same thing. The same is true here with the staff. This is what we just read. He's not even able to fall asleep. Have you ever been so sad you couldn't fall asleep? Dang, you're just like, man, in my house, we call that the saddies, right? You're just laying there and you're just like, I don't have that problem. As you can ask my wife, I can fall asleep literally. I mean, it's whatever. I'm really good at that. I think it's a spiritual gift. I'm just, boom, I'm ready for bed. It's bedtime. I lay down, I go to sleep. Now, some of you, you're not created like that. Now, there's times where I'm really excited and I struggle to go to bed. There's times where I'm like at Collide and I had a Red Bull at like 7:30 at night and I'm just like jazzed, right? I'm like, woo, I'm not going to bed. I don't care if it's 2 a.m. And I'm just like, well, I guess I could shower again. I mean, I don't really know what else I'm going to do because I'm not going to sleep. And as we think about this, he's saying, I can't even go to sleep. He is so sad. And he's deliberately focusing his thoughts on past times when God seemed to be so near to him. There's times in your life where God seems so near to you, but you always go back to focusing on when God seems distant. And you get so caught up in the sadness or the depression, the things that we deal with. And in verse 10, he talks about how he did this. He said, then I said, I will appeal to this, to the years in the right hand of the Most High. Instead of being caught up in what was bothering him, he looks back to what God has done for him. What an important step when you feel like you are locked down by sadness or you've got depression in your life. You have two choices to make. Either you stay in that state by focusing on the thing that is bringing you down, or you can turn your focus to God. Again, I'm not saying that is the cure for depression. I'm not the person who's trying to be insensitive and say anything like that. I think that there are places where we get in our lives that are so dark that we need supernatural things to happen in our lives. But what I know is this, is that a lot of times it starts small and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so when we allow our focus to be on what God has done, it reduces our chances of getting in a place like we saw here with Asaph, where he just is like, I can't even sleep. He's like, you hold my eyelids open. Imagine this image, the way that he feels. And this is when it's important to call a mental timeout. Just take a look around and look in the rearview mirror at God's past blessings. And when you mark God's faithfulness in the past, you condition your weary heart for hope that's tomorrow. Listen, if you can't think of a time where God showed up in your life, you can't think of a moment where God did something incredible. One of the first ones is when he sent his son to die for you. Now, whether or not you've accepted that, God did that. He says, because I loved you, I sent my son to die for you. Man, what an incredible thing to think about. Your life is so valuable, and some of you have no self-worth, but your life is so valuable that God would send someone who lived a perfect life, didn't mess up, didn't talk back to his parents, wasn't acting ridiculous out there, and just loved you and said, I'm going to die a physical death, painfully be tortured so that you can experience eternal life. That's a marker where God said, I loved you. So if you don't have self-worth and value and you struggle with that, you need to focus on the work that God did for you. I'm telling you, because as a young person, you put so much value in what people say. I have an 8-year-old that values what people say, the way that she dresses, the way that she talks, all those things. And you know what? She's a little version of y'all. And I see that in your lives where you live and die by the approval of others. And you don't need to be seeking any of that. And so now we've cried out to God, we've redirected our thoughts. The third thing that we need to do to avoid sadness turning into depression is that we magnify God to diminish your problems. Magnify meaning you make something bigger. I love science, and I know you're like such a dork. I don't care. I love science. I took all these science classes in high school. I took a class called microbiology. I barely got out of there. But in microbiology, what you would do is, like every single day, we were literally using microscopes, and we were studying different samples, and we're like swabbing our cheeks and then putting it in a petri dish. And I was like, oh, this is gross. Not as gross as that one kid in my class, but it was still disgusting. But you would magnify that, and you're like, oh yeah, that's just some saliva. But after a little while, when you look at that, you're like, oh man, this is major. That's happening in my mouth? Why? We need to brush my teeth more. I need to use Listerine more. I need to not eat anything. I only need to drink water. And they're like, oh, well, water's doing it too. So I'm just like, you know what? Honestly, I'm over it. But when I magnified that thing in that petri dish, I was like, wow. It kind of changed how I thought. When you magnify how good and how big God is, man, it can do some incredible things. Look at what it says in Psalm 77, and I'm going to read quickly here. Verse 13, it says, your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are the God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. He says, you with your arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Listen to how powerful he's saying God is. He says, indeed, the deep trembled, the clouds poured out water, the skies gave forth thunder, your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind, your lightnings lighting up the world. With the earth trembled and shook. It says this in verse 19, your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. He says, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. There's something about worship. He is worshiping. Asaph is worshiping God. He's like, look at how mighty you are. Just earlier, he was questioning. He's like, has your love forever ceased? And now he's like, the earth trembles at you. See, worship is something that God has created us to do, but it's not the instinct of a person who's in a state of depression. But when we magnify God and allow him to diminish our problems, when the gloom closes in and all that once drove your life kind of fades, we tend to pull the blanket up over our heads and we try to avoid God and everybody else. But Asaph willed himself to come to worship. There are deeply helpful benefits to gathering with God's people and worshiping. The reason that we do what we do, the songs that we sing, man, that's not so that we can hear how good of a singer you are. It is because we need that. And as a direct response, we are worshiping a God who loves us, who created us, and who desires for us to have great things. Asaph concentrates on the benefits that come from God himself, and he proclaims God's holiness. He talks about the miracles that God can do, and ultimately he closes talking about the Red Sea being parted. He says, you part the seas. And he's talking about this redemption of his people. And in verse 15, he says, with the power you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. God cares for me. God cares for you. He knows what's happening to us. He has a supernatural ability to do all that is necessary to fulfill his promises. I'm going to call Andrew back up here as we use this time to worship. I want you to write this fourth and final thing down, and that is this, is that God's power outweighs my problems. Listen, you guys deal with a lot being high school aged. There's just stuff that you have to deal with. It's not even fair. The emotions that you go through, the way that you experience life, I hate it for y'all. And it scares me. But what I know is this, is that God's power outweighs any problem, any situation, anything that you may experience. And you have to focus on those things. Asaph started out with a big problem, and he looked at God as a small God. And when he finished up, the tables were turned. He said, I don't have this big problem. He says, but I serve a big God. Some of you need to flip it. Some of you have small problems, or some of you have these big problems in your life, and you look at God as a small God, and God says, no, I'm a massive God, and these problems, they're not that big. And so I want to pray for you guys tonight as we enter into a time of worship, as we conclude our services. I just want to pray for y'all. Some of you are in a state of sadness or depression, and you may feel like you are stuck or you have nowhere to go. Man, we're here for you. If there's someone who you just like, I just need to talk to somebody. Man, that's why we have these small group leaders here. They love you. They care about you. They want to invest in you. And we want to be able to let you guys know that this is a place where you're safe. place where you can share emotions. You could tell me what you're afraid of. You could tell me what makes you sad. You could tell us all those things, and we're just here to love you and then just make much of Christ, all right? So I want to pray for y'all, and then we'll conclude with worship. God, thank you so much for tonight. Lord, I pray as there are people in this room who are dealing with these emotions of sadness, depression. God, we're not trying to fix anything, and we're just trying to focus on how good you are, Lord. There's a lot of things that can make us upset, that can make us sad, that could put us in a state of depression. But Lord, you outweigh all of those things, God. I pray that students understand that you love them so much. And God, if there's anybody in here tonight who doesn't have a relationship with you or has never experienced that, God, I pray that tonight they make that choice to follow you and to be obedient and faithfully follow what you have for them, God. We ask these things in your holy name. Amen.